Well, here's something that we really want you to hear, and we'll listen to you more. We're just going to interrupt briefly here. If we had the ability to remove all of that discomfort from your earlier experience, we don't have the ability to do it because we cannot create in your reality. But even if we could, we wouldn't remove it, because we would never deprive you of step one. Because what's in your vibrational escrow as a result of all of that is going to serve you so magnificently once you line up with it, you see. So if you can step back far enough to try to get a glimpse of what they're living, and try not to identify with it too closely. In fact, an identifying with what you think they might be living will hold you in that same vibration longer too. You just can't turn your attention there, but instead turn your attention as quickly as you can to what it is you now prefer. But it is a very common thing to feel value from something later on that you didn't feel value from while you were living it, and that's why. You've got to tell a different story. You've got to find a way of feeling your power. And you know, if we were focused in a physical body, or if we had a child who was, and somebody was bullying them, we would coax them into rage and revenge. And the school system wouldn't like it at all.
Yeah, I don't know if you noticed, but London has a problem with teenagers and knives. Which doesn't really square up with that, but
we understand that, but well, then let us modify our statement. We would have revengeful and rageful thoughts that we would hold ourselves apart from acting upon. In other words, we would move to that place. We would draw pictures and poke their eyes out. We would tear their hair out by the roots mentally. In other words, we would beat them to a bloody pulp. We would show them our strength. We would take back our power in our mind, and we would feel better than the fear or despair that we were feeling when we were feeling bullied. And then we would acclimate to that feeling of rage and revenge, which isn't appealing to someone looking on from joy and appreciation. In other words, anyone feeling good seeing someone in rage and revenge is troubled and worried about it. And if you were in frustration, we would never coax you into rage or revenge. It's going the wrong way on the emotional scale. But we would have you ever been utterly depressed and then gotten really angry about something? Didn't you feel better in your anger? Didn't you? Didn't you?
Yes. Unless
you had been so convinced that your anger was utterly inappropriate. And that's what happened to you. It's what happened to so many. Your inner being is calling you into revenge, because your inner being knows that that's on the way to revenge and rage, and then anger, and then less anger, and then frustration, and then hope, and then you're home free. Your inner being knows that as you move up the emotional scale, you'll feel better and better. But your society worries about you getting into revenge, because that's when you blow things up. That's when you break things. That's when you do things. And so many of them don't understand that they create their own reality. So they're in that guarded, protective place. Your societies are guarded and protective, and they think that they'll get to where they want to be by suppressing everything that they don't want. And they're not catching on that there's no suppression or stopping of that. It's all getting bigger. But a few of you, born with greater intensity, came forth, figured it out, and you're adjusting mentally. And in the process of alignment, you find your power, you see. So you could say to your sister, when this happened to me, I enjoyed thoughts of tearing them apart piece by piece. I laid in my bed at night and imagined pieces of them just falling off and me kicking it into the dirt. I laid awake at night and thought about places I could hide, that I could do things to them that would keep them from being able to go on. I sprinkled them with acid on some days and sent scorpions up their sleeves on other days. And as I found relief in those thoughts, I had less trouble from them. Somehow just thinking about my own strength and my own ability to cope with them sort of backed them off. I don't know how it happened. It was as if I mentally found my power, and then they started sort of slipping back. It was like my cowarding, my discomfort, my fear of them gave them fuel, and my fueling myself somehow took the fuel from them and gave it to me. And then I settled into that anger and resentment, but in time I found it to be almost as yucky a place as the fear had been before. And then I found myself reaching for other thoughts that felt even better. I started noting them as irrelevant. I started discounting their value in mine or anyone's life. I started acknowledging that who they think they are and who they really are as it relates to me are two very different things. I started diminishing their power, not because I wanted to kick them under the bus. I started diminishing their power in a sort of backdoor way of empowering myself. And then one day I reached the place where I was only mildly bothered by them. I found their behavior somewhat amusing. And when I saw them bullying others, while I didn't like it, I felt relief that I had somehow been let go of from their clutch. And I associated it with my turning my thoughts into a different way. Somehow I was no longer calling them to me as I made them irrelevant to me. And then about then, other things that are appealing to me started to be more relevant. And the more I began looking toward what I wanted and who I was, the more it was like the entire world shifted. And then not only did they not bully me, but I never even rendezvoused with them bullying anybody else. It was almost like we are walking the same school ground, but we are living in parallel universes where what I'm offering in terms of thought is creating an entirely different environment than where they are. When Jerry and Esther first began interacting with us, Jerry was riding around on his white horse with his big white hat, trying to make the world a better place. And his first thousands and thousands of questions were about this injustice and that one, and what about that, and what about that, and what about that, and what about that. And our first 2 or 3 or 4 or 5,000 answers to him were, that's not your work. That's not your work. That's not your work. We're surprised he stuck with us. That's not your work. That's not your work. And then one beautiful day, Jerry said to us, Abraham, what is my work? So what happens is, as you come into alignment with who you really are, the injustice of the world don't hurt you so much. And sometimes people, when they first hear this from us, it worries them, because they think that if they don't stand up for the disenfranchised, if they don't work to defeat the enemies against the weak, if they don't support those that seem to be in need, that things will get worse and worse. And we say the opposite of that is true. As you see them in their plight, you have put another version of them in your vibrational escrow. And if you don't live up to the version that you've put into your vibrational escrow, you cannot survive in joy, and you will never help them. But if you have the power to give your undivided attention to the being that you've put the little sister in vibrational escrow as you know her to be, if you join the vibration that you and the source within you and all that you consider to be good, if you stand there with all of us in the knowledge of who your sister is and how she deserves to be treated, that influence cannot be ignored. And people who have been after her will discover her to be invisible. And people who have bullied her will find themselves tripping over their own feet. People who have been unkind to her will no longer show up in her experience, because they will be invisible to her and her to them as she finds this different vibration. And she's much more likely to find it if you find it on her behalf first. That is upliftment at its best. That is teaching at its best.